I'm here with Dr. Gráinne McMahon, I hope I've said that right this time, yeah. From the University of Huddersfield, lecturer here, and expert, I'd say, in gender issues. Is that fair to say?
Possibly.
But yeah, no, thank you for coming along, and thank you as well for your time. Shake your hand here.
Oh, okay.
I wanted to do
Sorry,
that nice and formal, that's
yeah.
alright. But yeah, so I just wanted to start. I was thinking through some things you seem to have written everything ever to do with sociology and gender,
no,
so that's great. But you've written quite a bit. So I wanted to talk about one of the things I saw you were attributed to or to do with was girlfriend culture, and I study sociology. And I'd not come across that term before. I'd come across a lot of other cultures, you know, especially to do with gender, but not girlfriend culture. So would you mind telling us just a bit about what that actually is?
Yeah, sure. That was a project that one of my master's students was working on, and she came up with the idea of looking at girlfriend culture in the context of cosmetic surgery and the ways in which girlfriends interact with each other, girls who are friends interact with each other, particularly around issues to do with their body, etc., and how that leads to a culture of increased cosmetic surgery. And cosmetic surgery itself is not a focus of study in sociology, nor is girlfriend culture until recently. And girlfriend culture seems to be the term that is used now to look at and to consider the relationships between girls who are friends, and it's a very new concept, and about the ways in which girls outside of peer groups that might involve boys, the way that girls interact, the way that they influence each other for better or for worse, and how that may impact upon issues around self-esteem, etc. So what's been found recently in some sociology studies is that, and contrary to what we know from previous studies, is that girlfriend culture has a much greater impact on issues around the body, around self-esteem, than interaction with boys, and that's something that's quite counter to what we've learned in gender studies so far. However, what we've also found is that the interaction between girls can often bring about a higher likelihood of wanting some sort of cosmetic surgery. And that is because of the very traditional reasons that we're well used to hearing now, the patriarchal pressure to feel like a perfect woman, to look like a perfect woman, the ways in which women's bodies and girls' bodies is portrayed in media, in advertising, etc. But looking at it through the lens of girlfriend culture is very new.
So is it, in your opinion, does it fall more on, you know, because it is true that women are going down this body modification route, especially increasingly so. So would you view it more as an issue that men are causing, or is it more, do you think, girl to girl pressure in a way, or is it a bit of both?
It's very difficult to divide them. It's very difficult to establish or to attribute an increase in cosmetic culture among the young to men or to women, but it can certainly be attributed to what has become an incredibly body-focused capitalist culture that is fueled by advertising and is fueled by what are very patriarchal standards of beauty. Now, whether or not you want to say that men are at the centre of promoting those ideals, I'm not sure, and I'm not sure we have enough evidence to say that. But men, in their view of women, and particularly in their view of alpha women and what it means to be a woman and how you should look as a woman, is certainly part of this very destructive patriarchal culture.
Right, because men are also, I mean, a lot of people would say that men are also being held to more standards to do with their appearance. I certainly do think that's happening more than ever.
Absolutely.
So, you know, you talk about a lot of girls' self-esteem is, you know, becoming increasingly, well, maybe not increasingly, but it is certainly fragile and based on appearance a lot of the time. And people say it's happening more with men, that judgment on appearance, their self-esteem being a link to appearance.
It is.
Do you have any thoughts as to what the causation of that is? Because I can certainly say that men were never judged on appearance as much as they are now, I don't think.
Never as much as they are now, I agree, and certainly research evidence would suggest that as well. I think that we have to be realistic and argue that the patriarchy hurts men too. The extent to which it does so, I think, is questionable. And I think that men are held up to a particularly pervasive masculine ideal that is very much around hegemonic masculinity, where men are strong, they're overtly sexual beings, they are overtly promiscuous beings potentially, they are demonised for showing any signs of femininity at all, because gender and masculinity masculinity and femininity very often falls along a continuum where masculinity is praised, femininity is derided. Even women who overly perform femininity are derided in many respects for being weak and for being over-emotional, etc. So yes, absolutely, men are being held to a particular body type and body image, and that's also part of patriarchal capitalist culture. It's also part of what how advertisers peddle their wares, etc. I saw an advertisement, I don't know if you've seen it, I saw an advertisement for a new perfume that Johnny Depp is advertising now, and somebody defaced the advert and called it sausage instead of something else, which was quite funny. But even he is sort of, and I say even he because I don't really associate Johnny Depp necessarily with that culture, for want of a better example, even he is displaying what I think could be seen as very hegemonic masculinity. So yes, it does hurt men as well as women. Men come under the same body pressures and the same pressures to look good, and it is part of the same system.
It's interesting that you say patriarchy, because I got a little confused, because I understand a lot of people understand patriarchy to be it's just men dominating, it's men kind of running things. When you say it's damaging to men, so it must be a certain type of man in that sense. In the sense of it being, is it hyper masculine, or is it what kind of person would you say? What kind of person attributes to a patriarchal system or the patriarchy? Because it's quite a catch-all term that you hear thrown around a lot, and a lot of people don't fully know what it means.
It is a catch-all term, and it's very often used as an excuse, and I admit that I might, or as an explanation, should I say, I admit that I might do that sometimes myself. The patriarchy is a social system that is managed, run by and exploited by a certain sector of the population. But we are talking about men, but we're talking about white, middle class and above, heterosexual, privileged men who own most of the world's economic resources, they hold most of the world's social, economic, cultural, political power. We talked before the interview about Jeremy Corbyn, yet another white male who is leading one of the main political parties in the country, and that is the system of politics that exists in the Western world, certainly, and in most other areas of the world. And men also hold most economic power, economic sway, etc. So it is that category to which we can attribute these patriarchal errors or these patriarchal problems, rather than saying, and this is an issue that bounces around the feminist web and very, very often, rather than saying all men are necessarily part of the patriarchal problem, it is certainly attributable to a certain section of the male population. That is not to say that all men don't benefit from a patriarchal system. By the very existence of living in a male body, you do benefit from a patriarchal system, but you don't necessarily cause it.
It's nice to hear that as a man. It's very good.
One must be fair.
So taking a slight left turn, I want to talk about, because obviously your involvement in education, being a lecturer, and you're on the Athena Swan committee that I was doing a bit of reading about. It's about encouraging women to enter STEM subjects.
Yes.
Just a lot of people say that these subjects don't seem to be appealing to women, and I'm just wondering if you could maybe give an insight as to why you don't think they are?
Why I don't think they're appealing. Okay, so just to clarify, first of all, by STEM we mean the hard sciences, so your physics, your chemistry, things like that I don't understand. Physics, chemistry, maths, engineering, but it also includes more social science subjects like psychology, for example. Psychology traditionally would be much more equal in terms of its gender intake into undergrads, and then those individuals going and working in higher education afterwards. But the harder science subjects and your maths and engineering are definitely male dominated. To answer your question about why those subjects seem to be less appealing, I think that we start to, when we're bringing children up, we start to impose these gender norms on them for a very, very early age. You go into any toy shop in the land, and it started to drive me a bit demented actually. You go into any toy shop and there's the toys for the girls and there's the toys for the boys. And if you hang around there long enough, you will hear little boys and little girls being told that they're not allowed to play with that because it's for girls, and they're not allowed to play with that because it's for boys. So those very problematic gender normative assumptions and expectations are imposed on young people from a very early age. So in the same way then that the hard sciences, the engineerings, the maths, etc. are traditionally male-dominated subjects, there is lots of evidence to suggest that girls are steered away from those subjects very often, very early in childhood, when they're learning through play, and then when they go to school they're being steered away from those sorts of subjects. So traditionally they're not going into them, they don't think that they're for them.
It's interesting to say about Toy Star, because I have a very vivid memory of when I was that age. I can't fully remember what it was, but I remember there being a toy and being told, oh, that one's for girls.
Yes.
So I guess it's interesting that there's not a more divide around, there's certain subjects that are, like sociology is a subject which is actually a lot more women take at the minute, which is interesting that psychology is quite neutral and then sociology is a bit more female dominated, at least at the minute. I'm not certain of the total facts for that.
Yeah.
But I do remember hearing that when I was younger. So certain toys now, I think it still does happen now, but I think people are more aware of it.
I think people are more aware of it. You'll still hear it, and it hasn't stopped the industry trying to put out toys for like Lego for girls. I've not investigated it. I don't know how it differs to Lego for boys. I didn't realise Lego was for boys when I was playing with it last week. I'm joking.
Build a house and it's suddenly like a princess castle.
Exactly. And Lego were slated for that, and I think they ended up apologising, possibly withdrawing the product. But these companies do an enormous amount of market research. They thought that would sell. They thought that there's a market for Lego for girls. Because there is, I think, there potentially is, because we have girls' toys and we have boys' toys. Yeah. And of course, it's not just about girls being steered away from boys' toys and not allowed to play with screwdrivers, whatever boys' toys are, I don't know. But there's also evidence to suggest that boys are steered away from girls' toys, because the last thing you want to do is turn your boy into a little girl, because girls are so derided and femininity is so derided.
So things are getting, I think things are getting better with STEM. I've had a few friends back at home who are girls going into, I've got one going into neuroscience, which makes my sociology degree look like.
Yeah, that's another one that I don't understand. But, I think that schools are much more vigilant now and much more mindful of equality and steering both genders, all genders into.
So what do you think the emphasis is going forward then?
In what respect?
In regards to, you're on the committee and with the STEM subjects, do you think it should be about getting more women into? Is there still areas that I think really need a lot of attention, or do you think it's a battle that's getting slowly but surely won?
Well, at the moment, the focus of the Athena Swan is about careers in STEM. And obviously the feeders into careers, so the young people who go on to do undergraduates in certain areas then feed into careers. But it's very much about entering into a career in STEM after you've done a doctorate, say, or after you've done some sort of master's programme, and then being promoted within that field. And Athena Swan is very concerned about the lack of promotion of women in that field for a variety of reasons. Again, it's quite difficult to know why that might be. There's certainly evidence to suggest that women who take time out to have children are much less likely to get promoted or to advance quite as quickly in their career. There's also evidence that there is some sort of culture in universities where men are favoured. I'm not entirely sure about that myself, but it could perhaps be the case that women are less likely to put themselves forward for promotion because of, again, going back to a very complex process of socialisation where women just are taught to be passive and demure and to not self-promote in the same way.
I mean, there are, and I wanted to talk about this a bit as well, because in education there are quite a few studies that are showing that women are outperforming men quite well now. Well, I should say boys and girls, not women and men. And the statistics like, the suicide rate, victims of overall violent crime, where men are massively overrepresented. I couldn't get my word out there, I guess the question I want to ask, and without being disrespectful at all, is how patriarchal can a society be, and how male-dominated can it be when men clearly aren't that much happy? When we're dominating the suicide statistic. I know it's quite dark and that, but it's something that is a fact and it is worrying. I'm not trying to challenge everything, but
absolutely. I mean, the first thing, and this is no disrespect to you, I do find it interesting that that discussions about gender always come back to, but what about poor men? Always. And gender discussions are generally about concerns for women's rights and equality, yet they always deviate into, but what about men? But to answer your question, suicide rates, let's take that as an example. Yes, there is concern about suicide rates, particularly among young men. so a much younger generation, and I don't think that we know enough about why those suicide rates have risen. We know some, and I'm going to give you an example in a moment, but so we need more research into that. We don't know enough about why there are gender differences in suicide rates. But I think we can speculate that, and it goes back to this idea that the patriarchy does hurt men too. And it goes back to what we were talking about before the interview about Jeremy Corbyn's new Minister for Mental Health. I think that mental health issues are becoming much more likely or much more common than they used to be, or at least we're talking about them more. We are admitting that some people have mental health problems and that there's absolutely nothing wrong with that, but that they do need support. 20 years ago, 10 years ago, it was much less likely that people would talk about their mental health, of either gender, talk about their mental health issues. It is still much less likely, I think, that men will talk about their mental health issues because of this patriarchal idea that men are strong, that they're not vulnerable, that they don't cry. Boys are told still, I think, that they don't cry. So a man with mental health issues, I think, is much more stigmatised than a woman with mental health issues. So if support is not sought for those issues, that could potentially lead to higher suicide rates. But I read an interesting study the other day about male suicide rates, and I didn't know this, that one of the reasons, and it's a very practical and potentially obvious reason, one of the reasons that suicide rates are higher with men is because men use more lethal ways of trying to kill themselves, so they have a higher success rate. They're more likely to use guns, they're more likely, in the US particularly, maybe here now, they're more likely to use knives, whereas women are maybe more likely to take an overdose, something like that. So the lethality of your attempts to commit suicide increase in the male population, so they're more successful. So could it be something as rudimentary or even obvious as that explains the differences?
I've heard the reason before that a lot of it is men. A lot of men don't have the chance to see their children.
Yes.
In regards to the fact that I think a lot of people would argue, and it's hard to argue the fact that women 9 times out of 10 in divorce situations win custody of children very easily. And I think there's nothing I could think of more devastating. I don't have any children, but if I did, I can't think of anything worse than losing them.
And the flip side of that, for want of a better expression, is that another explanation might be that because women, particularly from a certain age onwards, have got responsibility for primary caregiving, are less likely to commit suicide, no matter how devastated they become or how difficult their lives are, because they have caregiving responsibilities for children. It's another possibility.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you for your time. Thank you for the day.
I'll shake your hand.
That's it. That's great. Dr. Graham, can I ask you, is there anything you want to ask our viewers? Anything you want them to read? Anything of yours you've got coming up? You want to publish? Or
I'm very involved in the feminist web, and I think that most of the, and I'm going to call it a fight because it's still a fight for gender equality, is going on online. That's certainly where most activism is taking place, online and then moving onto the streets very often, but it's organised online. And I think that the fight is very far from over when you look at the statistics. You mentioned there that young men are much more likely to be a victim of violent crime. You're absolutely right. Young women are still significantly and considerably more likely to be a victim of rape and of sexual assault and of domestic violence. So violence against women is a situation that is not only not getting better, but is potentially worsening. And that's something that is very, very central to feminists and to the fight for gender equality. I think it's really hopeful that organisations like the UN are placing so much emphasis on gender equality and have set up a whole pile of targets around gender equality, but filtering that down to women and girls' lived experience is going to be quite a challenge, and that work is very far from over as well. But I would implore men and women to get involved. Not just because these issues affect women most closely and most drastically, but because of some of the conversations that we've had, because it affects men too. And you mentioned children there, and I'm not going to fall into some ridiculous cliches about children being the future, but they probably are. And if we want to make some sort of better society that is less violent, that is less unequal for our children and for ourselves, and I think that the feminist movement is still very key to that. And Jeremy Corbyn, of course, how can I forget about Jeremy Corbyn?
Yeah. Well,
Thank you.
Thank you for your time, Dr. Grania.
You're welcome.
Get on the feminist blogosphere.
Get on the feminist blogosphere,
Get following Dr. Grania. I'm sure it won't be too hard to find her. And send it back to me in the studio, and we'll get ready for the panel. Thanks a lot.
Okay,
Thank you,
thank you.
Thanks, me. And now I'm going to introduce our panel for the night. Okay, so first we have, she's the women's rep. She's a third-year media and popular culture student with Georgina Wall, everybody. Next we have, he's a second-year media and popular culture student, same course. He's also the president of Hood TV, so he's keeping my job. Drew Murray, everyone. Next we've got Terry Gardner. He's a second year, have I got this right, hospitality student and business management, and he's also the chair of the Huddersfield Conservative Society in Huddersfield University. Terry Gardner, everyone. And lastly, she's the third year sociology student, one of my good friends, Jess Pickthall, and she's also, I want to say, the LGBTQ plus president and representative on society on council, so she does a lot for them. Jess Pickthall, everyone. All right, thank you all for being here, and let's start by asking you, Georgina. Last year you did with the tampon tax in the Students' Union, you passed a policy regarding that, which I was on council for. Do you want to just tell us first about what actually it was about and why you went and did it?
Yeah, so like a lot of people, I wasn't really aware of the whole tampon tax situation until this year, really. So when I received an email in February from Laura Corrigan, who started a petition for the tampon tax to be rid of, I started looking into it. It was from a website called change.org, which some of you might have heard of. It's a lot to do with petitions and just making change, obviously, as the name suggests. And she did mention within the email that a lot of universities were doing something about it and making a change. So I got in contact with our university's SU and basically asked if we were doing anything about it, to which the reply was, well, no, we're not actually. Would you consider starting a campaign or something like that? And so I started looking into how you can do a campaign with the SU and whatnot. I started my own campaign, got it out there on social media, and everyone kind of realised, like I did, that it was ridiculous. So although just changing it within the university is just a small detail compared to the country, it's a start. So I passed that through to the council, and then by March, literally the next month, it was passed.
Right, because it's the European Union, isn't it, that classes it as a luxury item? I'm right in thinking that's why that's what the tax is. It's seen as not a necessity. Does anyone else want to jump in on this and start? Terry, your thoughts on this?
Well, as you say, it's right. It's the European Union directive on value-added tax, which says that all products, some which I think are children's clothes and food, possibly, and charities, have to be taxed at a minimum of 5%, which is what the government have done. It's now taxed at 5% for sanitary products. And actually, I think taking it down any lower is pretty much pointless, because it wouldn't save the end user that much money. It would save, well, between £2 and £4 a year, which you're not really going to use that on anything, are you?
I wouldn't know.
Right, so my argument is that it doesn't matter what it's saving the EU, it's the matter of principle and morals. Like, why should women be charged for something that is only naturally occurring? It might not make that much of a big difference to you or to the European Union or whatever, saving money, but it makes a big difference to us knowing that we're respected in that way, because it is an extra charge. And I don't know about them, but it costs, well, me a fortune every month. But when you think about, for example, edible cake decorations, zero tax, bingo, zero tax, exotic meats like kangaroo, ostrich, crocodile, no tax, flapjacks, no tax, but tampons are. So morally, it's just incorrect.
It's an interesting one, and it raises questions around other things as well. Would we consider condoms being still, because they're still classed as a luxury and they're still taxed in the same sort of way? Is they something that we think, I mean, I know they get them a lot for free as well, they get handed out to students, but would you still consider them something that possibly you could go down the same route of trying to get them out of that tax bracket? I mean, I know you haven't. You've got it on this council, not in the world. That would be amazing. But in terms of, do you think there's something as well that a lot of people say? Well, generally only men buy them. So what does the panel think on that? Drew, do you want to jump in on that? I mean, feel free.
Well, as you say, condoms are handed out free in quite a lot of places. You can go to sexual health clinics and get them free there. Students get them handed out free, especially freshers' fairs. For a reason escapes me. Having something taxed as a luxury when it's not a luxury, as a matter of principle, as you say, is something that doesn't make sense. For people to believe that it is a luxury means that they don't quite understand what the product is for.
Yeah.
Now, the practicality of it being £2 to £4 per year is all that you'd be saving doesn't mean anything to someone who is needing to pay that £2 to £4. As in, the fact that it's that small doesn't matter. It's the fact that it's an amount. If the inflation rate changed, if the amount that was worth, that £2 to £4 was worth, changed radically, or if someone decided to increase the amount of minimum tax that luxury items have, there would then need to be a whole other campaign to go and remove this now like £50 or £100 per year that's being lost into tampons or something. So removing it now, nipping it in the bud, so to speak, means that we're not needing to fight that fight further on down the line, and it means that we're clarifying something that is patently ridiculous at the moment. It's classifying it as a luxury item.
There is a slight issue though with it's not all one brand, and there are different forms that are more expensive. And some would say that they are more luxurious. Should they fall, or should there be basic? I mean, I don't fully know, but should there be basic tampons that are not taxed at all, and then you could possibly put a luxury tax on the brands? I don't know any brand names.
Yeah, my opinion is that you know how you can go to clinics, for example, and get free condoms that's just like a standard condom. I think if you make the effort to go to a clinic for tampons, it should be the same kind of concept.
Okay. Yeah.
So if you want to go there and make that effort to go and get them, then yeah, there should be a basic standard provided for free. And if you want to go and get some sort of luxury version, that's up to you. They're not gonna, if you go to a clinic and they're not gonna provide all sorts of different ribbed condoms, etc. So if they just provided a basic, and by all means, if you then wanted to go, well, not you specifically, but if women then wanted to go and buy a more luxurious version from the supermarket, then I think that would make more sense.
Yeah, I think that's not a bad idea, especially regarding to how much more expensive can it be to make a tampon than a condom. I mean, I don't know the ins and outs, sorry for the wording of that, but of making either product, but surely a rubber latex thing must be harder to make than a tampon. So that's probably an answer that would make a lot of sense and would also stop the UK falling under any EU charges regarding the whole the tampon tax, because they physically couldn't go against the EU as it is right now.
It's been a while since I've worked in a condom factory, so I'll need to get back to it.
Anyway, I want to move on to the next subject, because this is kind of almost breaking at the time of this filming, with Jeremy Corbyn recently being elected leader of the Labour Party. If you didn't know that, then I'm surprised. But we're going to discuss an idea of his that we've come across a lot, which is that on trains there should be female-only carriages. The idea of this being to prevent sexual assault and other things that happen on trains. This time I want to start with Jess Pickthall. Good idea? Needed? What do you think?
Well, I think his thoughts behind the idea and the reason why he'd have it is essentially good, but it's not addressing the main issue, which is that there is a lot of sexual assault and harassment on public transport. Segregating men and women on public transport, it may reduce it, but it would also create a kind of stigma against women who don't go on the segregated carriages, because if they were sexually assaulted, it would be blamed on them. So it would be like, oh, well, you should have gone to the female-only carriages, that's how it could have been prevented. It also ignores that there are men which are victims of sexual harassment, and it's not only women being victims and men being the perpetrators. The victim and the perpetrator can be of the same gender as well. Also, it also ignores that there are other genders which are victims of sexual harassment and sexual assault, so people who are non-binary.
That's an interesting thing, and the thing that really got me when I read it and when I started to read this is it basically says this carriage is for people who are rape victims, but this carriage is for people who are rapists. And I'd be in the rapist carriage, and I'm not a rapist. And I feel like we talk a lot about stigma against women with things like these. I think there'd be a stigma against men, and maybe it's because I'm a boy and I think about these things, but I think there is a real problem where guys who, the majority of violent sexual crimes are committed by men. The majority of men don't commit violent sexual crimes. And I think a lot of the times we're made to feel like we might be about to, and we feel like other people view us like we're going to. So that's something that really struck me with that it wasn't just bad for dealing with that issue, but dealing with others as well. I don't know if anyone else wants to jump in and what their thoughts are.
Certainly when it comes to sexual assault and rape, it's an issue that I find very difficult to talk about.
Of course, yeah.
Because it's not something that I live in fear of. It's not a feeling that I've ever had. And I've tried talking to my wife about this, I've tried talking to other women about this, and it's not a feeling that I'm able to be brought to understand. I want to be able to know what I don't want to know what it feels like, but I want to be able to understand intrinsically this fear of these events. I personally am against the idea of the segregation of the carriages. I don't think that it's a practical solution, and as you say, it seems to label men as potential rapists, which is an issue, and it also victim blames in a way. It's, as you were saying, if a woman's not in the woman-only carriage, there's then potentially less support for her claim of being sexually assaulted. In the 1850s, when segregated compartments in carriages were brought into London and other regions in the south, there were cases where women were still sexually assaulted in these female-only carriages because they were alone in these compartments, and so there were very few witnesses. So this kind of assault was still able to carry on. The issue with Jeremy Corbyn's thing is that he's wanted to bring them in after 10 p.m. There's a lot less staff and a lot less people at those times. Who's going to stop men getting into these female-only carriages if it does go ahead?
Well, it's very problematic, it seems. Before I move on, does anyone else want
can I just say?
Yeah, of course, definitely.
I think it's important to point out that Jeremy Corbyn did say to The Independent that he would ask women themselves about it and whether they would want it. He hasn't just gone and said, I'm going to do this.
Yeah.
He's specifically said, I'm going to ask women if this is something they'd like. So it's important to know that there's a difference. Like, he's obviously in his mind thinking he's doing something that's helping us, which obviously isn't at all. I don't agree with it at all, but he's just trying to do what he thought might be a good thing. So I don't think we should blame him too much. But like we said, the British Transport Police, the figures do show that there is a 25% increase in sexual assault. So there definitely needs to be something done. But I think the money that they were going to spend on doing female-only carriages should be gone into more security and more teaching people at a young age for more respect. Like, you can't just treat the symptoms, you've got to go back to the root cause and treat that.
We're going to talk about that in particular later. I really want to get back to that, educating when they're younger. But right now I want to go on to this lawyer, because this is big news, and this is something we really need to talk about. Charlotte Proudman is the name of the woman who basically tweeted out this picture. We're going to display it now, and the quote, where basically he called her stunning. I haven't got the exact quote here. It'll be on the screen. But so we're just going to ask, is it sexism? Is it what a lot of people say, an innocent compliment? Is this an example of misogyny, or is it just really, it's unprofessional? I think we could probably all agree on that. But is it an example of misogyny? I mean, that's what she's kind of claiming here. It doesn't seem right, does it? I mean, this guy is a creep. I mean, do you see what he commented on his daughter's pictures? His daughter's Facebook profile picture, he commented, I know I shouldn't say this, but yeah, she is hot. I mean, Donald Trump talked about his daughter the other day. It's getting a bit wrong, isn't it?
Yeah, that's a bit weird.
It's getting a bit weird, calling your daughter hot. Don't do it. Definitely don't do it. So what do we think? Is it how big a deal is this? Because it's been made by the media in a big deal, but really it's one message. How big is it? What are you guys thinking?
He does call the picture and not necessarily her stunning, and it says that she's got the best picture on LinkedIn. So an argument could be made, playing devil's advocate, that he's not necessarily saying that she is stunning and catcalling her over the internet. But I do feel that everything that he was saying was very sleazily just trying to grease professional wheels.
Yeah.
And I should say, there's also other citations that we've got of him being quite misogynistic and objectifying women.
Yeah.
So it seems that, given that context, it was just a very wrong and unprofessional thing to do.
I do wonder about the whole situation and how it's going to be resolved. She can't get work since. She's really struggled getting work because she has, because people are saying she can't be trusted. She's a liar and she's what's the word? She's leaking out information that's sent to her in confidence.
Well, it's only libelous if it's not true.
She's not in trouble, it's just she can't get work from it. No one will employ her to take on care. Terry, go on.
The other fact is, she has also done this, not on LinkedIn, on Facebook, but to men. So, does she not have double standards there, where if she's posting on a men's profile, oh, you're really hot, and then someone says it to her, she's like, oh, you're such a misogynist because you're a man and I'm a woman.
Wait, what do you mean? She commented on it?
She's commented on people's pictures on Facebook.
Who are her
pretty
friends?
Much the same thing.
Yeah, but they're her friends.
But LinkedIn is a professional
are they her friends? I mean,
site.
Facebook is quite, most people you don't know that well.
I agree that you can't really. I wouldn't say it's sexism specifically. I won't say that, but the fact that this was on LinkedIn, which is a business sort of profile website, is totally different to Facebook. Like, the reason you would make a profile on there is to show your attributes and show your business skills. So I do agree that she can't call it some specific words that she has done, but it is a totally different situation. It's a lot less unprofessional to do it on there.
Unprofessional, but that's pretty much it.
I think we've made too big a deal of it, as
Basically,
the media has.
I think it reflects a bigger issue, which is that women's appearances and their physical appearances are put before anything else. This woman, Miss Crowman, she's a lawyer. She's going in to study a PhD, and I'm afraid, but I think she's under 30, so it's quite an achievement. And she has said herself how sick she is of receiving multiple kind of comments like this, whilst her husband receives job offers. It's completely unprofessional, and it also reflects the bigger issue in society, which I've said. And as you said about Facebook, that's a completely different setting. So I say to my friends on Facebook, oh, you look great in this picture, because they're my friends. I wouldn't go onto LinkedIn, find someone who's looking for a job, and then say, oh, wow, you look amazing in this picture. I'd look for their other attributes, like say, oh, if I was looking for a person to hire, I'd say, oh, you've been very professional, would you consider this? It's completely inappropriate.
You now have a nice rack of suits.
Of course it does.
Sorry. Okay. I want to move on. I want to come back to what we were mentioned before when you were talking about re-educating when they're younger. Because there is a group called the Call to Men, and they run these workshops. And I've been seeing recently where they're going into schools, they're getting children who are between the ages of 7 and 12, and they're basically teaching them how to have healthy relationships, how to respect women, and all these things. And I've got to say, I've got quite mixed feelings on it, and the reason being is when I look at statistics like child abuse, 40% of child abuse victims male. A lot of those, I don't know the exact figures, but a lot of those are perpetrated by women. And I imagine being a victim of such a horrendous thing, and then going into a workshop and being told that you're the problem, you need to respect women. You know, this is how to respect women because you're not naturally good at it. I don't think they need any more guilt and shame just for being a male. I mean, I don't know what the panel thinks on that, and I feel like sometimes feminism as a movement, possibly when they say it's only purely for gender equality, should probably take it for women's equality. And we need a real movement that's not as terrible as the MRA movement for actually getting men's rights issues out there, because there are some that are very legitimate and a lot of feminists do discuss them, but a lot don't as well. I think that's a big problem. I want you guys to...
This group that you was talking about,
Yeah.
did they only teach how to respect women, not men
Boys,
as well?
boys only. It's a call to men. So it's a call to men too. And the workshop they teach is titled "How to Respect Women in a," what is it they refer to it as? I've got written here. A more feminist society than ever.
Right. Well, what I would say is that concept is a very, very good one, but they need to do equally both ways. If you did that, but men and women, that would be perfect. But you can't just go in and say, this is how you treat women, you've got to do men as well.
Yeah.
And if that was the case, I would have thought that would have been a great idea, just not how you've just explained it now.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. Well,
I was going to say, Jess had a point earlier that men aren't the only ones perpetrating sexual assault, and they're not the only ones perpetrating sexual assault against women either.
Yeah.
The idea of gender and sexuality is becoming a lot more nebulous these days. So a group now, in this day and age, only targeting men, telling them to treat women better, when some of those men could become homosexual, some of them could be asexual, and not get into a relationship with women. And even if they don't get into relationships, they could just go on to respect women naturally anyway.
Yeah.
But also the idea that girls in what could be argued as a very patriarchal society, it may be worthwhile teaching them to respect themselves and men in the same way.
And other women, if they grow up to be homosexual as well.
You see, I was talking to Grania about this, as it was in the previous interview. I'm not sure how much I really buy things that patriarchal. When the suicide rate is this high for men, when we're the victims of violent crime, when 99% of deaths in wars are men, when you go to prison, you're you're treated a lot more harshly by the penal system if you're a man. I don't know how dominant men can be when we're getting really damaged by quite a lot of things, and we're not dominating that well, if that's the case. I think the term patriarchy it's so loaded, and if it insinuates that all men are dominating all the time, well, I'm not part of it, and I'm not one of them. And that's the thing. So I think it is such a big catch-all term. That it does scare me when people throw it around, because I don't like that. I don't like painting it as men, women are from Venus and men are from hell. I'm not a huge fan of that philosophy. Someone jump in and stop me.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, almost linking it back to the original question, but going from what you were saying about prisons. I did recently find out that the Feminist Majority Foundation in the United States was one of the few groups, along with Ms. magazine, that tried to change the US definition of rape to include men, because men were being raped in prison. So
it's more than any other group.
But it was a feminist group and a feminist magazine.
It's on feminist.org, and it was passed in January 2012. So the definition is the feminist.org managed to get the FBI to change the definition for the FBI Uniform Crime Report. So that definition got changed 3 years ago.
Because on the federal level, rape wasn't recognised as including men. A man could not be raped in the US according to federal law.
Yeah.
Until a feminist group came in.
And it was majorly women who did that.
Yeah. And I'm certainly not saying that feminists only do negative. I certainly wasn't saying that they do negative things, I completely overlook it, but a lot of the times it feels like it's a women's movement for women. I think Terry, would you say that you feel that way? And Drew, I know you identify as a feminist, but on the outside, did you ever feel like it was a women's movement for women and then learn more about it?
Well, certainly before I started looking into feminist groups and the feminist movement, I just identified as a feminist because I was given to understand that it was for equal rights for women as well as men.
Okay.
And I've also known from a very young age that it is a rather male-dominated society.
That worries me. That as a kid, you were told your gender's doing bad stuff. That worries me.
My mum was a raging
that does concern me.
women's rights activist, She was
awesome.
Yeah, she called herself a feminist, but she wasn't quite. She thought that men needed to be brought down a rung or two.
Which isn't feminism.
No.
It must have been devastating when the CAT scan came back. The baby scan came back. I need to bring him down. You did well for yourself. You've done well for yourself.
Yeah, thank you. But it seems to be that only after looking into it that I then find that it's not so one-sided. The feminist groups are looking out for men's rights as well. Now, it does seem odd that the general pervasive nature of feminist groups doesn't seem to communicate that they are for men as well. Culturally speaking, we're not just kind of brought up in that miasma that's understood. It's something that I felt that I needed to look into. So it may be an image issue for feminist groups that they just need to address.
But potentially a name change. Anyone else? I mean, we're going to go on slightly further.
I think basically feminism is for women, and I don't think they have that much of a cause anymore. I think they nitpick a lot now.
Okay.
Because the most recent statistics from 2014 show that actually in the workplace, women under the age of 40 now get paid more than men. 2% more than men.
Yeah,
doing the same.
I mean, the issue is when we start going at statistics, there's one statistic for every statistic everyone throws out. But what I will agree is girls are doing a lot better in education, and not many people seem to really be doing that much about it. Girls are outperforming boys in every level, from primary school through to a university.
We just need to give them harder tests to do then.
That's not a bad shout. But you know, there's things like saying grade markers potentially are more lenient as well. People say, but it's one of those things. Jess, and I know we've had a million conversations about this at the house.
Yeah.
What do you think? I mean, about feminism and how inclusive it is for men, and what you think it could potentially do better or worse, or if it's perfect?
Well, feminism is mainly a movement for women. It was started for women when they were very disadvantaged in society, and I don't think that that's completely gone away, but it has. You can't ignore that it has gotten better. There are issues that men face, but I don't think the legitimacy of feminism should count on how useful it is for men. It should be legitimate in itself because it's helping to improve society. Though, that being said, feminism does not ignore issues that men face. I would say that most issues that men face surround themselves through the issue of masculinity and trying to be masculine. So, for example, you could say stuff like sexual assault. Men are less likely to seek help and report it because being a victim of sexual assault makes them look less masculine. You could say that lots of men are committing suicide more than women because they don't get help earlier on, because saying, oh, I have a problem, makes them look less masculine.
Do you know what I think a big reason is? I think a big reason is because when it comes to issues around divorce, and me and Grania briefly touched on this, men very rarely get the children. And not being able to see your kids is one of the most devastating things I could ever imagine. And
it's actually an issue that I'm dealing with at the moment. My daughter...
I apologise, I genuinely didn't know, I'm sorry.
My daughter lives in Denmark with her mum.
Yeah.
And in fact, they were supposed to be living in America. But they've kind of absconded to Denmark, and I'm needing to deal with that legal issue at the moment. But it's strange the way that the laws are worded and the way that they function. Legally speaking, a child goes to their primary carer, who is by default the mother, simply because they are in close proximity to the mother. But if at any point that primary care is broken early on in the child's life and it becomes the father, they are then the default primary carer, and then the law technically sides with them in all things, and the mother then needs to work harder. It's an unfortunate quirk of biology for men who are going through this issue, being separated from their children, that women are the de facto primary carer. But as much as the law can be in the UK, it is fairly neutral. It's just unfortunate that it doesn't turn out.
How come every statistic, the result is women get 95%, and that's crazy. That is ridiculous that custody cases fall that one-sided. I don't believe that only 5% of men want to see their children more.
When it comes to custody cases, they're actually looking into the legitimacy of that statistic, because it was found recently that a lot of custody cases are settled before court. So it's not bias in the court, it could just be how they settle it before court. Because it might even look that it's more equal, perhaps. Well, not, it would be perfect it was 50%, but maybe more equal than it is seeming like 9 out of 10. It might be something like 6 or 7 out of 10.
Regardless, if you in that case, I do think the law should start at 50-50 though. There should be no primary carer.
Absolutely.
There should be no secondary carer. It should be 50-50. We'll start from there, and we seem to start from why should the mother not be in primary custody, and we should be starting from 50-50. Anyway, I want to follow on from this and get out of this because it's quite heavy, and we're all getting a bit sad and emotional. I apologise for that. So I want to follow on and talk about our council here in the university one last time. I'm going to go back to Georgina to default. Your role as women's rep, Kevin Lawson, myself, there's been a couple of other people who've really spoke about changing this role. Because an issue I had in my first year on council was a lad came up to me and we were talking about, basically he was worried that there was a lecturer who was biased against him for a number of reasons, and he said, but who do I go to? There's a women's rep, but that wouldn't represent me, I'm a man. And that was the first time I ever really thought, why don't we just call it gender equalities rep? Or why don't we? Or Kevin wanted to bring in a men's rep. Georgina, it's your role, so who better to ask?
Okay, so I didn't even know this role existed until February when I started getting involved with the SU, and I instantly had an issue with it. And I know that sounds ridiculous because I've campaigned to have this role and I am that role, but the best way I can think about changing something is by getting inside it and eating my way out. I 100% think that it should be a gender equalities rep. I want to be a gender equalities rep. I don't want to just be a women's rep. So I've come here, and in fact, when we started the new year for university, this was something I was going to be speaking a lot to the SU about, and as soon as you sent me the questions for the panel today, I was so excited that you put this question in because it was definitely something I wanted to already discuss anyway. And although it is my role, I don't just want to be for women because I don't agree with that. I think there should be for both.
Okay. Because they did make it so that only women could vote for your role, which was devastating.
That was something I had a big problem with. In fact, when I went round and a lot of when I was speaking in groups, there'd be guys sat there and they'd be like, oh, that sounds great, yeah, I'll vote for you. And I'm like, I'm sorry, but you can't. And they was like, what do you mean I can't? Yeah. And I was like, exactly. I said, it's not right. Like, women's issues involve men, and by just doing women who can vote only, that once again isolates us and makes us two different species as such. And when the whole point of it is to try and bring us all together. So I think what I was going to do was go down, speak to the NUS to see if they could change the rules, because it's their rules, the NUS's rules, that men can't vote. But then I thought, well, if we change it to a gender equalities rep, then both genders, well, all genders, sorry, not just both, all genders can then vote anyway.
Oh, that'd be great.
So yes, I think that's something we should definitely change.
Does anyone disagree, as in it has to become women's rep, or anyone think there should be a men's rep and a women's rep? I want to know what the opinions are going across.
Well, as I've said before, gender is becoming a more nebulous thing.
Yeah.
So a gender equalities rep would kind of make sense. The only reason we need a gender equalities representative, or at the moment a women's representative, is because of the inequalities that we're seeing between genders.
Yeah.
As that gets resolved, it's a role that hopefully should cease to exist. You know, ideally speaking, in a few hundred years' time.
So should the one that deals with people in poverty as well. But
Yeah. So this is something that we're at the moment only needing to deal with at the present time. But at the present time, there are more than two genders, and so at the moment you either have a women's rep and a transgender men to women rep, and a transgender
that's Jess is. Jess has got LGBTQ+, so she would come under that. But so you want would a men's rep as well be something you would advocate then, or?
Well, rep stands for representative.
Yeah.
It's just a shortening of it. So to have each person or each demographic be represented, you would need someone to represent the ideas and wants and needs of that demographic.
Okay.
Men, I would say, are already being represented on the council, and so a separate men's
Well,
representative.
hold on. There are women on council who aren't women's rep.
And I'm not saying that the women's representative as a separate title is necessary. I'm saying that each demographic would need representation on the council.
Terry, do you want to?
I mean, I think purely because it would be simpler, you should have a men's rep and a women's rep, because possibly if you had a gender equalities rep and then you had a man doing it, they might not know all the, things that women have to deal with, and vice versa, so...
Yeah, that is a point. Yeah, some people have advocated having 2 gender equalities reps, one for men, one for women. But it'd probably it'd be simpler to just do men.
I understand what you mean, but I do think that's a good idea, because if I had another person to discuss it together but have a separate opinion, we can make decisions together, but both give an opinion, and then 2 together can make a better one.
Yeah.
If we've got different ideas, joining them together might make a better idea, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I do think working with another person just to try and get an all-round perspective would kind of broaden the horizons, so to say.
And Jess, your stance on this?
I don't have that a strong opinion on this topic. I kind of have a few thoughts on it more around. I don't think there should be a men's representative on council. I think either there should just be a gender equalities rep, or there should be a gender equalities rep and a women's rep. If there was just a gender equalities rep, I don't really believe that any men would go for the role, just because I don't think as many men are as interested as gender equality as women are. Also, I don't
Where's
really
that
think-
from? Just
From personal experience, not as many men.
just because I care about, I care, and Drew probably cares a bit, and Terry probably cares a bit, and I mean, okay, grant you're okay, so everyone else is female, but still, and I mean, I think it's quite a bold statement to say that we don't care about gender equality.
I don't think as many men. I didn't say that men weren't interested. I said not as many men were as interested as women are.
Yeah, touching on that, what I can just say is, I do think men are definitely interested, but Jess is right to an extent where Terry was saying that feminism is just about a women's movement. What I can say in line with what Jess is saying as well is, because women seem to be slightly more interested, more articles about the women's sections and how women's rights have changed are like viral on social media, etc. They go around more, whereas there's a ton of things that they've also done for men, but men don't seem to share them around as much, which is why people who are as knowledgeable on the subject don't think that feminists do a lot for men, because it's just not as out there, because maybe men don't spread it around as much.
I think there's something to that, and I think women use social media a little bit more for posting those sort of things. I see anyway, just from my newsfeed.
Yeah.
I don't know if anyone disagrees in that sense. I think men post more John Cena videos.
Where are your sources?
where am I? I have no sources for this one. Just I see a lot of John Cena and other things from my guys. I see a lot more serious stuff sometimes from the girls too. So it might be a general Facebook issue. But yeah. So regarding council, so I came into this thinking gender equalities. And I'm leaving thinking men and women's. Because if you have a women's rep and a gender equalities rep, and if Jess is right in that no men would go for that, then you've got 2 women's reps.
If there was only a gender equalities rep, if there was a women's rep and a gender equalities rep, I think it might force more men, like, not force them, you know what I mean, like, they'd be more...
So could women still go for the gender equalities rep?
Yeah.
See, my concern is that you have 2 women's reps.
Yeah.
No, I think the women's rep to represent women, and then a gender equalities rep for gender equality, because I don't think there should be a women's rep and a men's rep. I think it could be counterproductive in the way that they'd kind of be against each other.
Separated, yeah.
If you know what I mean.
I can only go on myself, but because everyone's different, and obviously not everyone has the same morals and perspective as me, but I care just as much about both genders, and because I like listening to people, if some males came to me and said, you know, this is happening, I really want to change it, absolutely, I'd do everything in my power to try and help them. I'm equally as interested, so if I was a gender equalities, and yeah, you can argue that I don't know how it feels to be a guy, but I am good at listening, and I can try and understand experiences to the best of my ability, and if that was my role, if that was my new role, then I'd do my best to, you know, understand both equally.
Fantastic. I think we're going to have to probably cut the panel part of the show now. We're going to have to go at the grill because I'm getting nodded at furiously. Alright, so under the grill this week, Kim Davis, Conservative America's latest hero, Kim Davis, who spent 5 days in prison after refusing to give marriage licenses to gay people. I kind of had a little bit of respect, you know, stand up for your beliefs, but then I found out she herself's been married 4 times. 4 times. She can't give out any marriage licenses because she's used them all herself. It's ridiculous. And to say you have principles like that and going and doing it for God, it's just insane. Next under the grill this week, anyone getting married at the Church of Bacon? No, I'm not making this up. 12,000 people are now registered to have a funeral, wedding or baptism at the Church of Bacon in Las Vegas. I mean, I kind of get the funeral part, you know, make sure they're really dead, who's not getting up for the smell of bacon. But a wedding? Like, you want to smell like bacon on your big day? It's just wrong and weird. Come on, people. Next up on the grill is Basingstoke police officers, because 4 police officers were injured, with 1 requiring hospital treatment after an unarmed 82-year-old woman beat them. Now, look, I know you can't hit an old lady back, but seriously? 4 of you couldn't stop her? And next, Paul Neveson. Paul Neveson was a bank robber who went into NatWest and was doing just so well with his knife. He had them all at knife point. And then he gave them his account information and said, put £500 into my account. Police arrested him promptly after the bank robbery. And finally, Jeremy Corbyn. No, not for the train issues we were talking about today. And I'm not putting him under the grill for his controversial stance and his controversial statements in the Middle East. And it's got nothing to do with any of his other policies, except for one major thing. His cabinet has no fucking women. Chancellor. Nope, that's a guy. Home Secretary. Guy. Foreign Secretary. Guy. Deputy Leader. Yep, that's a guy too. And he's not very good either. No women, nil, nothing. It's just insane. Now look, I'm not an advocate of tokenism. I don't want you to put a woman in just for the sake of it. But this is Labour's 22nd male leader in a row. Really? There's no women who are at all good at politics? All you got to do is lie, you know, occasionally kiss a baby, maybe give a nice smile, get to know some people, shake a few hands. Women can't do that. It's just ridiculous. Since 2000, all of our political parties have only had male leaders, except for one. The Greens, Liberal Democrats, never had a female leader. Conservatives, okay, you've had Thatcher. How many times can you really play that card? And, you know, she's also quite a scary person. UKIP, they've never had a female voter. It's just insane. Okay, maybe that last one's not true. But you see my point. Our friends across the pond in America have the exact same problem. Outside of Hillary Clinton, name another female candidate of either major party. There's no one who's got a real chance of winning. For a country's political system to function and truly represent people, it has to have all different creeds and races and all the different things that make up a real society. No, I'm not advocating all women shortlists, and I'm not advocating quotas either. Why? Because we shouldn't have to hold a gun to your head to make you vote for a woman. Right, that's our show. I'd like to thank Georgina Wall, Drew Murray, Terry Gardner, Jess Pickthall and Grania McMahon. Join us next time, whenever that'll be, when we're going to discuss issues in the Middle East, Syria and a lot of other things. I'd like to thank you. I'm Daniel Stevens. Thanks a lot, guys.
Lauren is a saint.
Oh, yes, he is.
Cheers for doing that, everyone.
Only person to keep his seat is the Liberal
Have we
Democrats.
filmed the intro yet?
You know we haven't.
Right, we filmed the intro so I don't...
Dun dun. Although I must say, I did think that the luxury tax.